The sea is restless. Waves roll beneath a gray sky where clouds hang heavy with unspoken intent. A silence spreads across the horizon, vast, eerie, and sacred. Moments later, thunder murmurs. The wind begins to shift. It is the summer of 1281. A fleet unlike any the world has ever seen sails toward the shores of Japan. Over 4,000 ships, carrying more than 140,000 soldiers, a force so immense that even the ocean groans beneath its weight. They are the armies of Kublai Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, the emperor who commands half the known world. China, Korea, the steppes of Mongolia, all bow before his seal. But there is one land left unconquered, an island nation of poets and swordsmen, a land that calls itself Nihon, the origin of the sun. For the Mongols, this is to be another conquest. For Japan, it will become a legend. As the fleet advances, the sea darkens. The air thickens with salt and prophecy. And then it happens. A storm rises, sudden, violent, divine. Winds spiral out of the heavens, tearing ships apart like paper. Waves the size of temples crash upon wooden hulls. Flames burst where lightning strikes. Men cry out, Mongols, Koreans, Chinese, swallowed by the roaring Black Sea. When dawn comes, nothing remains but shattered masts and drifting corpses. The invasion fleet, gone. The army, drowned. The sea, silent once more. The Japanese called it Kamikaze, the divine wind. A miracle, they said. The gods had defended Japan. But was it really just luck? Or had Japan, small, fractured, seemingly defenseless, outsmarted the greatest military machine the world had ever known? To understand this miracle, we begin with the man who sought to crush Japan beneath his empire's shadow. Kublai Khan, ruler of the Mongol Empire, grandson of the great Genghis. By the late 13th century, his reach extended from the deserts of Persia to the jungles of Vietnam. No nation had resisted him. None had survived him. But Japan was different. It was not a unified empire, but a web of clans, loyal to their lords, to their ancestors, and to a moral code older than the Khan's empire itself. This was the code of the samurai, the warrior's way. In 1268, Kublai sent his first letters to the shogunate in Kamakura. They were not invitations, they were ultimatums. Surrender or be destroyed. The Japanese response was silence. No tribute, no reply. Silence, the first weapon of strategy. Because in silence, one controls time. The Mongols, used to swift submission, grew restless. Years passed. More letters came. More silence. Finally, in 1274, Kublai lost patience. He gathered his armies from Korea and northern China, 30,000 men, 1,000 ships. They would make Japan listen. When the Mongols landed at Hakata Bay, the world changed. For the Japanese, it was the first time they faced an enemy from beyond the seas, a force unlike any they'd known. Drums thundered, smoke bombs exploded, explosive shells burst with black powder, a weapon never seen on Japanese soil. The Mongols fought not as individual warriors, but as a machine. They advanced in tight formations, shields interlocked, arrows flying in coordinated volleys. They used horns and gongs to communicate across the battlefield. Against them stood the samurai, each a lone warrior fighting for honor, family, and name. Their duels were personal, almost ceremonial. But the Mongols brought war that was impersonal, efficient, relentless, psychological. At first, the Japanese were overwhelmed. Their individual bravery meant little against the storm of arrows. But the samurai adapted quickly. They learned to fight not for display, but for survival. Night raids began. Ambushes replaced open duels. By the second day, the Mongols had retreated to their ships. And then, the wind rose. A storm struck, scattering the fleet. Hundreds of ships smashed against rocks. Thousands of soldiers drowned. To the Japanese, it was divine retribution. Kamikaze. The gods had answered their silence. But behind that silence had been something more. Observation, patience, and preparation. While the Mongols saw divine wrath, Japan saw opportunity to study, to adapt, to prepare for the next storm. Because they knew the Khan would return. After the invasion of 1274, Japan did not celebrate. They rebuilt. Along the coasts of Kyushu, where the Mongols had landed, new defenses began to rise. Stone walls stretched for miles, 6 feet high, miles long, thick enough to withstand a charging horse or a landing ship. Watchtowers were built to signal attacks. Clans, once rivals, began to coordinate. But their greatest weapon was not the wall. It was mindset. Monks from Zen temples began to train samurai not only in swordsmanship, but in stillness. They taught that fear is a wave. It rises, it breaks, it passes. A warrior who does not fight the wave, but flows with it, cannot be broken. While Kublai Khan rebuilt his fleet with the arrogance of empire, Japan rebuilt its soul with the humility of preparation. And when the second invasion came, it would be the mind, not the sword, that turned the tide. The shogunate enforced discipline through ritual and repetition. Each province trained as if the Mongols would land tomorrow. Every warrior learned patience to wait for the perfect moment. The year is 1281. 7 years have passed since the first storm. The sea remembers, but so do the men. On the Mongol mainland, Kublai Khan seethes. The loss of 1,274 was an insult, not from heaven, but from defiance. He will not allow it to stand. This time there will be no mercy, no hesitation, no escape. The Khan gathers a fleet beyond imagination. From Korea, from the ports of southern China, he summons 2 great armadas. The Eastern Root Army, 40,000 strong, launched from Korea. The Southern Root Army, a colossal 100,000 men, sailing from the ports of modern-day Shanghai. Together, they would converge upon Kyushu, crush Japan between 2 advancing waves. It would be the largest amphibious invasion the world had ever seen, until the 20th century. As the Mongol fleets gather, the air across East Asia grows tense. Merchants whisper of wooden mountains stretching across the horizon. Sailors vanish. Coastal villages fall silent. And in the temples of Kamakura, monks begin to pray. But Japan was not the same nation it had been in 1274. The islands had changed, united by shared trauma and quiet determination. The shogunate, led by the Hojo clan, had learned to think like water. Still on the surface, but moving with purpose beneath. They had rebuilt the walls of Hakata Bay, now taller, stronger, and lined with spikes to shatter the Mongols' landing craft. Watchtowers stood along every cove. Signal fires could carry a warning from one province to another faster than any messenger. And the samurai, the defenders of Japan, had learned a new kind of warfare. They no longer waited for honorable duels. They struck like shadows, sudden, precise, psychological. They had learned from the Mongols themselves. Where once Japan fought with pride, now they fought with patience. They understood that in war, waiting could be the sharpest weapon. As the fleets approached, Japan did not meet them at sea. They waited, watching the wind. In June of 1281, the Eastern Root Army reached the coast of Kyushu. They expected quick victory. Instead, they found a coastline transformed into a fortress. The walls of Hakata Bay stretched for miles, dotted with archers and catapults. Every beach was barricaded, every landing point mapped and fortified. The Mongols attacked, and the walls held. Arrow after arrow clattered against stone. Their ships could not land. The sea itself became their prison. For weeks, the Mongols tried to force entry. At night, Japanese warriors rowed small boats into the darkness, silently boarding enemy ships, killing crews in their sleep, then vanishing into the waves. The Mongols began to fear the water. They started to see ghosts. Swords flashing in the moonlight, faces painted white, eyes empty of mercy. It wasn't madness, it was strategy. Japan had turned fear into a weapon. Every delay, every sleepless night, drained the invaders' morale. Every hour they waited, the sea shifted. Currents twisting, winds whispering of change. The Mongols had power, but Japan had time. And time, the monks taught, is the strongest ally of the disciplined mind. Meanwhile, far to the south, the Southern Route Army struggled against storms. Thousands of miles of open ocean separated them from their northern allies. Weeks passed before they could reach the coast of Kyushu. By then, disease and hunger had already begun their quiet conquest. The two fleets, meant to unite, never truly did. The Mongols' greatest advantage, their size, became their weakness. Coordination failed, commanders argued, supplies dwindled. On land, the Japanese harassed them relentlessly. Small boats attacked in swarms, setting ships ablaze. Night after night, the Mongols saw the same pattern. Fires on the horizon, silence, and the slow return of dawn. It wasn't just warfare, it was psychological conditioning. The Japanese wanted them to wait, because they knew the longer the Mongols stayed at sea, the more the sea itself would join the battle. By late July, the Mongols were restless. They had lost men, time, and morale. But Kublai's orders were absolute. They were to conquer Japan, or die trying. And then, the sky began to change. The first signs were subtle, clouds thickening, pressure dropping, birds vanishing from the shoreline. To the Mongols, it was weather. To the Japanese, it was fate approaching. In the temples, monks lit incense and whispered prayers to Hachiman, the god of war and divine protector of Japan. The samurai waited along the coast, armor gleaming under a silver sky, eyes fixed on the horizon. They were not afraid. They had done all they could. The rest, as always, belonged to the wind. In early August, the typhoon struck. Not a mere storm, a force beyond comprehension. The sky split open with thunder, and the sea turned black. Winds tore sails to ribbons, snapped masts like twigs, and crushed ships against one another. The ocean became a battlefield of chaos. Thousands of ships collided, shattered, and sank. Men screamed for the gods of every faith they knew. Mongols, Koreans, Chinese alike. The waves did not care. The sea claimed them all. When morning came, the shorelines of Kyushu were littered with wreckage. The remains of the greatest invasion force in human history. Corpses washed ashore for days. The sea smelled of death and destiny. For the second time in less than a decade, Japan had survived the impossible. And again, they called it Kamikaze, the divine wind. But the monks and generals knew the truth. The storm had not saved them. It had completed what they had already set in motion. Because strategy, in its purest form, is not about control. It is about alignment. Japan did not fight against nature. It prepared alongside it. Their patience, unity, and timing turned chance into inevitability, as one Zen master wrote centuries later. The unprepared man calls it luck. The disciplined man calls it timing. news of the disaster spread across Asia. Kublai Khan raged in disbelief, the emperor of half the world, defeated by wind and will. He planned another invasion, but it would never come. His empire began to fracture under its own weight. The Mongol threat faded into legend. Japan, on the other hand, emerged changed. They saw themselves not as lucky survivors, but as protectors of something sacred. The harmony between effort and destiny. The monks preached that the storm was heaven's reward for discipline. The samurai understood that survival was the outcome of readiness. The people believed that when a nation moves with purpose, even the gods take notice. And so the word kamikaze became more than a story. It became a philosophy, a reminder that nature and spirit, preparation and fate are never separate. The sea is quiet again. The waves roll softly against the same shores where men once fought gods. What remains are not the ships or the corpses, but the silence. Silence, Japan's oldest weapon. In that silence lies a secret. They had never sought to defeat the Mongols. They had sought to outlast them. When Kublai Khan looked upon Japan, he saw a small, disunited island, a place of peasants and priests. He believed conquest was a matter of size. But Japan understood something deeper, that power is not mass, but momentum. It is not how strong you are, but how well you move with the rhythm of things greater than yourself. In war, the Mongols looked outward, at armies, ships, and steel. The Japanese looked inward, at patience, timing, and spirit. And in that difference, history was decided. The great walls of Hakata Bay were not built merely of stone. They were built of understanding that a nation's greatest fortress is its mindset. Every monk who meditated, every farmer who prayed, every samurai who trained, each played a role in creating a harmony the Mongols could not touch. While the Mongols sought dominance, Japan sought balance. The monks taught the warriors that the storm outside is nothing compared to the storm within. Control that, and no empire can conquer you. In Zen, there is a saying, "A flower does not compete with the flower next to it. It simply blooms." Japan did not try to rival the Mongol Empire. They became themselves more completely than ever before. That was their victory. To the untrained eye, strategy is about movement, troops, ships, and weapons. But to those who study deeply, strategy is about stillness, the ability to wait until the enemy breaks themselves. This was Japan's genius. They understood that nature itself could be part of strategy. The winds, the tides, the patience of preparation, all were weapons. They didn't summon the storm, they created the conditions for it to matter. When the divine wind came, it was not a coincidence, it was culmination. The alignment between man and environment, between mind and moment. The Mongols relied on command, Japan relied on connection. And that difference between control and harmony was everything. Even before the storm struck, the Mongols were already unraveling. Fear is the shadow of confusion, and confusion is born from waiting. The Japanese understood this perfectly. They never needed to outnumber the enemy. They only needed to outlast their will. Every silent night raid, every delay, every unseen ambush eroded the Mongols' confidence. The great empire that conquered the steppes and empires of Asia had never faced an enemy that refused to meet them on their terms. Japan fought not to win battles, but to shape perception. They let fear do what swords could not. To defeat the enemy, wrote a later samurai scholar, you must first make him see the battle through your eyes. The Japanese made the Mongols see Japan not as a target, but as an enigma. a land protected by forces beyond understanding. That is psychological warfare at its purest form, when belief becomes a weapon. At the heart of this strategy was Bushido, the way of the warrior. It was not merely a code of battle, but of being. It taught that death was not the enemy, dishonor was, that fear was illusion, and patience was strength. Bushido was born from centuries of conflict and polished by Zen. It demanded that every action reflect harmony between sword and soul, body and mind. A warrior trained not just to strike, but to see, to read the rhythm of an opponent or the rhythm of nature itself, to move only when the moment was ripe. When Japan faced the Mongols, Bushido met empire. And in that meeting, something timeless was revealed. Empires crumble when their minds are restless. Nations endure when their minds are still. Centuries later, the word kamikaze would return, misused, redefined, distorted by another war. But in its original sense, it meant something sacred, not destruction, but deliverance. Kamikaze was not about the storm that destroyed the Mongols. It was about the harmony between human effort and natural timing, between resolve and fate. The storm was not the cause of Japan's survival. It was the symbol of it. Proof that nature itself honors those who move with discipline, humility, and purpose. The monks of Kamakura said, "The gods do not protect the careless. They protect those who protect their own hearts." In the years following the invasions, Japan did not expand outward. It turned inward, into reflection, art, and refinement. Temples flourished. Poetry deepened. The sword became both weapon and brush. From the ashes of threatened extinction rose a culture that defined balance, beauty, and impermanence. The Mongols had brought chaos. Japan answered with composure. Their survival was not just a historical event. It was a spiritual statement that no empire, however vast, can conquer a nation aligned with its own soul. What does the kamikaze teach us now? 700 years later, it teaches that luck is the name given to preparation meeting opportunity, that chaos favors those who can remain calm within it, that victory begins long before battle, in discipline, mindset, and unity. When we face overwhelming odds, we can choose panic or patience. Japan chose patience, and patience, anchored in purpose, became invincible. In our world of constant noise, the lesson endures. Silence is not weakness, it is awareness. Waiting is not inaction, it is mastery of timing. And true strength is not domination, it is alignment. Just as the samurai studied the wind, we too must learn to sense the unseen, the changing tides of life, the quiet signs before the storm. Because the greatest victories are never sudden. They are prepared for, silently, persistently, faithfully. The Sea of Kyushu still carries the whispers of that storm. Fishermen say that when the wind turns warm in late summer, you can hear echoes, faint drums from another age, a murmur of forgotten courage. But the real legacy of the kamikaze is not in the wind. It is in the hearts of those who understand what it meant. That fate is not random, that preparation is divine, and that when the human spirit aligns with the rhythm of the world, even nature itself becomes an ally. Victory, then, is not in conquest. It is in understanding. It is the quiet knowing that strength does not come from power, but from presence. As the Zen masters would say, when the storm rages, the wise man does not curse the sky. He waits and sails when the wind turns. The Mongols sailed with ambition. Japan waited with wisdom. And when the wind turned, history followed it. That is the true secret of the kamikaze.